Okay, everybody, Monday. I'm going to try to make this Happy Monday or Welcome to Monday. Welcome to Monday. People like Happy Monday, right? Welcome to Monday. There we go. I'm going to try to make this fairly quick because this is an extension of a conversation on Twitch that I found fascinating and I'm still mulling it over. If you like this sort of thing, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. $1 a month. If you watch one video a month, it's worth it. My entertaining face. My entertaining words. Maybe not so much my face. And Scout's in the co-pilot seat. Yay, Scouty. But this is about the discussion that happened on Twitch surrounding the Senran Kagura franchise. Senran Kagura, right. I'm still working in the Japanese name, sorry. Franchise, and the whole Sony censored the game for the PlayStation 4 version, I believe. And it led to a whole kerfuffle, and they ended up canceling the franchise, and Sony said it was because of the Me Too stuff, and people going, that's censorship, I oppose it. And so I played the game on PC so I could play the mini game that was the source of it was removed. It's a side game. It has nothing to do with the main game at all. It's actually a totally separate menu. It's just a side option removed. But my reaction was that somebody clipped it with the joke, Leanna.exe has stopped working. I did find it disturbing. I did. It was a reaction I could not control. Because this is one of these things where Japanese school cutoffs are different from American school cutoffs. So my understanding, based on what I've been told, I have no idea, but that the bulk of the girls in the game are essentially 18 years old, third year. But a couple of them are first year and therefore 16. So there's a groping minigame where 16-year-olds are, and there's no indication that it's not consensual, but I can see there's a little narrative translation issue where there's so much gray area. Oh my God, my hand gestures are terrible right now. And I mean, it was like these zombie Mickey hands, these disembodied zombie Mickey hands, and you know, you can kind of grope them. You can actually slap them in places too. Now, the implication is that these are things that these girls like. The problem is that context can get lost very easily. And what I determined was going on with this game was that this is content that is considered totally acceptable for teenagers in Japan. So it's a peer relationship, right? It's, 16-year-olds or 14 to 15-year-olds going hee 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 boobies with 16 to 18-year-olds. That's considered appropriate content. I mean, I've read like manga for teens, like some shoujo stuff, and I'm like, this is for like this is appropriate for 14-year-olds in Japan. Okay, different cultural standards that are valid. The problem is you bring it over here, and that's immediately going to get labeled N for mature. I don't agree with this. I accept that this is so. And so all of a sudden you've got a change of frame, where instead of it being 14, 15-year-old boys going tee-hee boobies, you've got adults doing this with girls who are on the edge of legality or underage. Very different thing, right? Like, I think we can all agree that that's a different thing. And this is the bind Sony found itself in. And so I see both sides on this. I said off the bat that if you are just sort of opposed to censorship, period, end of story, that's a valid position to have. I could poke some holes on that. Well, does that mean everything should be allowed? And some people say yes. I'm not sure I agree. every business, and this is the problem with the way we speak to each other online. There is no public broadcasting service for the internet. There is no open source form of discussion like a Facebook or a YouTube. It's all private companies. And private companies have the right to set terms of service because they have brands, and these are for-profit entities. They have to be able to control the edges of their brand. And, YouTube hasn't become increasingly censorious on their own. They've become increasingly censorious because of Wall Street Journal articles and advertisers freaking out, right? There is nothing moral about any of this. These are reactions to outrage, to, suburban Karens pitching a fit that their 14 and 15-year-old boys would probably enjoy playing Senran Kagura. And to be clear, just because I was bothered, I don't believe the game is harmful. People know that when you hit people with swords, their clothes do not fall off. That's what happens in the game, for people who don't know. I find myself wondering, well, isn't this better than the brutal violence we see? Like, why am I more bothered by a groping minigame that just sort of lacks context? So it's not telling me it's not consensual. I can decide for myself whether I think this is a consensual encounter or not. But I was like, they're too young. And I played through 2 characters for science, and then I bailed out, and I'm never touching it again because it just made me feel too creepy. But creepy is not immoral, right? I think if it were up to me, and this is an unpopular opinion, but I would rather my 14 or 15-year-old son or daughter got this out of their system. Hey, anime girl boobs. We know that in real life, people's clothes don't fall off when you hit them. I don't think that's going to encourage an otherwise stable person to non-consensually grope somebody. But let's face it, that's not the issue in America, is it? It's that they don't want their sweet little daughters being consensually groped, right? Like, that's really what's at the core of it. There's a greater fear of that in America than there is in Canada, though in certain places, Canada's not a monolith, but certainly in Japan, it's more of a fear in the US than it is in Japan for various reasons that we won't get into now. But I enjoyed the experience, from sort of an academic perspective, because it did make me question my own responses. Now, taking off the anthropologist hat and putting on the business hat, even though in general I don't like the idea of having to cut totally justifiable artistic content, and yes, fan service is justifiable to an extent. I would rather teenagers do that exploring through media where nobody gets hurt and no one gets embarrassed, especially in the age of the internet, than, fumbling around and possibly getting shamed for it later. But I know I'm atypical in this regard. And I asked in the Twitch chat, I said, where's the line between business decision and censorship? And people didn't really have an answer for that. And I said, devil's advocate here, from my point of view, the rest of the game is surprisingly decent for a fan service game. Like, I was expecting something more like, even though I was told that it was kind of like Bayonetta in terms of combat, I had fan service in my mind. I had Dead or Alive Volleyball in my mind, which, let's face it, the gameplay in Dead or Alive Volleyball is not the point. I love the Butsumo mini games, but they're shallow as a saucepan in terms of gameplay. The gameplay in this game actually has some depth to it. It's like, you know what? This game, that totally optional side game aside, is actually good. And if I were Sony, I'd be like, I would like people who have a PlayStation to be able, and not a gaming PC, to be able to experience this. This mini game, this side game is not a core feature. So this isn't the hill we want to die on. And people have some issues with that. And this and we got into a really interesting philosophical discussion about consistency in rules. And it really became a matter of perspective. They made the comparison between The Last of Us 2, which had uncensored sexual content in it, and Senran Kagura that got censored. The thing is, there's still clothes coming off in the middle of battles, okay? That, to me, they were saying that's like versus like, and one got censored and one didn't. And I pointed out, the player is not directly involved. It's a cutscene with Abby and what the fuck's his name? Owen. All right, Owen. It's interactive in Senran Kagura. The player's directly involved. That makes it different. It's more comparative to what happened with the South Park games getting censored in Australia and the European Union, and everybody just kind of laughed that off. That was considered like, oh, South Park, And what I find curious, and I don't have an answer to the why, is why was it sort of like, well, that's kind of dumb, but okay, they made the best of it with South Park, where, I'm sure Trey Parker and Matt Stone, had they been able to get the final call, go, no, don't censor it. If they don't like it, screw it. It was very similar, right? Because it was an alien anal probe scene, and because it was a child, certain governments objected. Whereas, there was this huge backlash about this mini game that isn't part of the main game. That's the like versus like I'm using, right? I think that's more of a direct comparison. I actually think it's good that Sony did not make that Senran Kagura censorship part of a slippery slope, because we got Jin's butt and Ghost of Tsushima and, Abby's non-boobs. I hate to say it, but let's face it, that's what it is. That's part of the dodge, that they didn't get criticized for just a gratuitous sex scene, because I'm not saying it. That's the presumption in that scene, right? But I see that as more, no, this is not part of a slippery slope. Sony is not going to be increasingly censorious. I see reasons why they have to go case by case basis. And I don't think it's philosophical. I think it's just business decisions. And they have the right to make those business decisions. And I see the logic in this particular business decision. And that brings me to this issue with, I don't like the false modesty. I don't like the hypocritical, superficial, anti-sex attitudes of the West right now. They really bother me on feminist grounds. Because if we're allowed to see Jin's butt and not Jane's butt, what does that say about our belief of Jane as a whole person, right? Men are allowed to have butts that we see, because we see men as whole people. And we see men as the initiators of their sexuality. We still collectively see women as just vessels of other people's sexuality, as opposed to people who are initiators of their own sex lives. And I'm not going to be able to monetize this video now, so Patreon. But That's a problem. Like, if we're able to see Jin's butt, we should be able to see Jane's butt, or, in Ghost of Tsushima's case, Yuna's butt, right? Equal opportunity butts. Equal means equal. Equal means if it's okay to do to a man, it's okay to do to a woman. That's what equal means. Unfortunately, we have this weird double think morality. And there's always an element of double think to cultural norms. Especially modesty norms. But this one's glaring. And I think it's great. You can see Jin's naked bum in a non-sexualized manner in Ghost of Tsushima. I'd like women to have the same freedom. Okay, thanks. And don't tell me it's because, oh no, they're male developers. It's just perf. No, that's suggesting that, you're assuming that Jin's butt wasn't perv, and hate to break it to you, but I found every hot spring in Ghost of Tsushima in chat for the people who like that. Like, I was doing fan service through Twitch in that. There are gay guys and women who watch my channel. There's so many problems with this double standard. Now, I can object to the double standard. I can say what's wrong with the double standard. I have to acknowledge the double standard is there. And I have to be prepared, like in this video, to take a knock when I violate that double standard. I know that YouTube's advertising does not allow frank discussions of sex and sexuality. So I make videos and take the revenue knock accordingly. This is why I push the Patreon, so I can do stuff like this. But I can't be blind to the reality that this double standard exists. Like, why am I taking up arms against the double standard and then complaining when I get hit by the double standard? That's hypocritical. And this is why I find these discussions so fascinating and so important, because I see the other side. I see why the other side doesn't like the fact that something that is totally culturally acceptable for teenagers in Japan is treated as dirty in another culture that the game was not made for. That was a Japanese game for a Japanese audience. Release it as a cultural exchange. From a moral perspective, from an arts perspective, from a cultural perspective, I agree with that 100%. We should not be forcing art from other places in the world. Eastern Europe is much more open about sexuality than we are as well. We should not be forcing it to conform to North American modesty norms. We should not be forcing the content of the world into an American media frame. From a business perspective, I totally get why Sony did what they did. And that's what makes issues like this, to me, so fascinating. And I wish that there was more discussion. Now, we get into that, cultural thing as well, because Japan has very different beliefs regarding, and very different cultural practices regarding speaking truth to power and arguing with your boss and that kind of thing than we do in the West as well. So, publishers arguing with Sony higher-ups doesn't go as well as maybe it would at Xbox, though. I think if we had that, we'd have Alan Wake 2. Please make Alan Wake 2, Remedy. Please make Alan Wake 2, Xbox. And Sony, make a Sly Cooper game while you're at it. Anyway, interesting stuff. Please, to recap, I am not advocating censorship. I am saying my gut is don't censor a Japanese game to conform to Western modesty norms. I accept that my viewpoint is not the one currently driving American discourse right now. And so, because of that, I am not mad at Sony for what they did, even though, as an artist, I disagree with it. As a business person, I understand it, because I am not even going to attempt to monetize this video, because it may affect my self-rating algorithm when it gets demonetized because my line is not the same as YouTube's. So I'm just not going to make the chance. So I'm doing the exact same thing Sony did in a lot of ways. I'm just not taking the step. I'm removing the element of the experience that might get me into trouble so the rest of it can be provided to the audience. Okay, if you like this sort of thing, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, because that's the only way I'm going to make money off this video. Thanks for watching.